Have you ever felt like a place is hiding something so dark that no one dares to speak of it? Some locations are filled with secrets so disturbing they should never come to light. That's exactly what happened in an abandoned elementary school in Cedar Creek, Texas. Folks around here avoid the topic, but I witnessed everything firsthand. My name is Mr. Walter. I'm 78 years old, and I've carried this burden in silence for far too long. A story that still steals my sleep to this day. If you love chilling tales, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because what you're about to hear will linger in your mind long after it ends. It all began when I was just a boy, back in those innocent days when it felt like bad things only happened in movies. But real life has a way of outdoing any fiction. Cedar Creek was a quiet, close-knit town where everyone knew each other and days moved slowly, filled with laughter and carefree games. My childhood seemed no different from that of the other kids, at least on the surface. Yet there was something odd about the old public school building, something invisible but heavy that made the more sensitive among us shiver when we got too close. The structure was ancient, with paint peeling from its walls and shattered windows clumsily boarded up to hide the decay inside. Our parents warned us never to step foot near it, especially into the basement everyone called St. Matthew's. And local lore suggested the place was home to more than just forgotten relics. Some whispered about soft voices, murmurs, and giggles from children who were no longer alive. At that age, I couldn't really grasp what any of it meant, but the fear I saw flicker across the faces of the grown-ups whenever that basement was mentioned was enough to keep me at bay. Of course, not every kid heeded those warnings. Curiosity tends to be stronger than fear. It was precisely that irresistible curiosity that set everything into motion. As we grew, an eerie heaviness seemed to creep deeper into the school's crumbling walls. It felt as if sorrow and anguish had been imprisoned there, waiting for the right moment to slip free and claim new souls. I was just a child, too naive to understand the true nature of what was happening. But innocence offers no shield against the darkness, especially when that darkness is ravenous for revenge. The events that unfolded would forever alter life in Cedar Creek. That decrepit building was more than just a rotting shell. It was the beating heart of something malevolent no one had dared imagine, and that something was about to awaken. While most of us kept our distance, there was one kid in town who seemed drawn to that cursed school. His name was Ethan, a slender, withdrawn boy who sat next to me in class. Ethan rarely spoke. He kept his head down, avoided eye contact, and carried a quiet sorrow that none of us understood and all the adults conveniently ignored. I can still vividly recall how cruelly the other children treated him. They shoved him in the hallways of the new school, mocked his worn-out clothes, and spread nasty rumors that made his isolation even worse. Ethan never fought back. He simply endured it all with a look that was more than sadness. It was something deeper, something broken. Over time, Ethan faded into the background, practically invisible. No one paid attention when he missed school days, not even the teachers, who were always too busy to notice the bruises peeking from under his sleeves. Adults wrote it off as roughhousing, but we kids knew better. Ethan lived a daily nightmare with no one willing to pull him out. What puzzled us most was how Ethan often went to the very place we feared, the abandoned school, specifically into St. Matthew's basement. Sometimes we'd catch glimpses of him darting across the overgrown lot like a shadow seeking refuge in the ruins. Why would anyone hide in a place so steeped in dread? It was a question none of us could answer back then. The weeks dragged on, and the atmosphere around Cedar Creek shifted. The abandoned school felt heavier, as though the silence around it thickened into something almost tangible. Whispers began to circulate among the grown-ups, muted tales of strange happenings, faint lights flickering inside at night, distant sounds of laughter when the building was supposed to be empty. The door to St. Matthew's, chained and locked with rusted iron, should have made it impossible for anyone to get inside. At the time, none of us linked these eerie events to Ethan. In our eyes, he remained just the invisible kid, too small and too broken to be noticed. But we were wrong. Ethan wasn't just hiding in that abandoned basement. Unknowingly, he was stirring awake something ancient, something starving for the very despair he carried deep within him. One bitterly cold afternoon, while I wandered near the old building with my friends, we watched Ethan slip inside once more. It would be the last time we ever saw him alive. None of us could have predicted he would become the first victim in a chain of horrors that would shatter our town forever. Even now, just thinking about what happened next sends chills racing down my spine. That final glimpse of Ethan vanishing into the school filled me with a deep unease I couldn't shake. A shiver ran down my back as I stared at the doorway, swallowing him whole. Why would anyone willingly step into a place so cursed? St. Matthew's basement had long been whispered about as a forbidden zone in Cedar Creek, a space so stained with negativity that the mere mention of it made folks fall silent. Supposedly, it had once been used to store discarded furniture, old tools, and dusty textbooks, but older folks spoke quietly of something much darker. My grandfather once shared a story with me, his voice low and grave. Decades earlier, a teacher named Mr. Anderson had supposedly lost his mind and locked a group of children down there as punishment for harmless pranks. Some claimed one of those children never made it out, and that his spirit lingered, trapped, bitter, and waiting for vengeance. At the time, those were just ghost stories to me, but like most legends, they were rooted in painful truths. Now, seeing Ethan step alone into that forsaken basement made me wonder if he knew something we didn't. Was he seeking answers, or merely a refuge from a world that had been so unkind? Within days, strange occurrences swept through Cedar Creek. Neighbors reported hearing inexplicable noises drifting from the old school at night. Soft footsteps, children's whispers, even distant cries. Most adults dismissed it all, but deep down, I knew better. Something old and hungry had awoken, and it was feeding on the sorrow that Ethan had unwittingly carried into its lair. Still, nothing could have prepared us for what happened that icy morning, the true beginning of the nightmare that has haunted me ever since. When we arrived at our current school that day, we quickly realized Ethan was missing. At first, no one seemed too concerned. After all, he was often absent. But something about this time felt wrong. There was a heaviness in the air, a gnawing sense that something terrible had occurred. That same afternoon, as we wandered past the abandoned school, my friends and I stopped dead in our tracks. The massive lock that had always kept St. Matthew's door sealed was now broken, and the basement door stood ajar, swinging slightly in the cold breeze, like a grim invitation into the unknown. At that moment, we understood. Ethan hadn't merely disappeared into the darkness. He had unleashed something that was never meant to be freed. What we discovered next should have remained buried forever. Frozen in fear before the open doorway of St. Matthew's, we hesitated. The icy draft seemed to whisper our names, urging us forward into the darkness. Every instinct screamed to turn away, to run, but the relentless pull of youthful curiosity proved stronger. The days that followed felt uneasy, as if a dark cloud had silently settled over Cedar Creek. Daniel's disappearance seemed to be brushed aside by most, but I couldn't stop thinking about how strange it was that no one dared to mention it. It was as if the entire town had chosen to turn a blind eye to the horror unfolding before us. Then, the unthinkable happened. Tyler, one of the most popular kids in class, vanished without a trace. He was everything Daniel wasn't: outgoing, confident, and often the ringleader behind the cruel pranks that many, including Daniel, had suffered. The morning Tyler failed to show up, the whole school felt eerily hollow, as though something essential had been ripped away. The last sighting of him had been near the old abandoned school, right by the grounds surrounding the basement known as St. Matthew's. Some kids claimed they had heard Tyler's mocking laughter echoing across the field, as if he were teasing someone invisible. Others swore they had seen a shadow moving close behind him, something creeping up before both figures disappeared into the darkness. The police launched a full-scale search, combing the town and questioning neighbors, but there wasn't a single clue. It was as if the earth had swallowed Tyler whole. Rumors began to swirl among my classmates, though nobody dared to say aloud what we were all thinking. His disappearance was connected to the old school and to the silent boy everyone had mistreated. Tension grew thicker each day. In the halls and during recess, whispers and fearful glances became our new normal. Adults tried to maintain the illusion of normalcy, but their eyes betrayed a deep, silent terror. Somehow, we all knew that what was happening wasn't natural. Something evil had awoken in Cedar Creek, something thirsty for vengeance. It was then that I found a note hidden inside my school desk, a note that made my heart freeze. Scrawled hastily in trembling handwriting, it read, "More will come. He demands justice." I felt the blood drain from my face. Who had written it? Who was he? And what exactly did the warning mean? At that moment, a horrible realization gripped me. Tyler wouldn't be the last. Something far worse was looming over us, and there was nothing we could do to stop it. Tap the yellow lamp icon and stay with us as we uncover chilling mysteries together. What happened next confirmed our deepest fears. After that eerie message, it was impossible to ignore the suffocating darkness that settled over Cedar Creek. Each passing day, the weight in the air grew heavier. The atmosphere at school became unbearable. It felt like we were all skating on thin ice, just waiting for it to crack beneath us. Rumors about Tyler's disappearance grew wilder by the day, but no answers came. His absence hung over us like a storm cloud, and even the teachers' empty reassurances couldn't soothe our growing panic. Deep down, we all sensed it. Tyler wasn't coming back, but the nightmare was only beginning. A week later, another boy, Liam, vanished without a trace. Liam had a reputation for causing trouble and was often seen alongside Tyler, bullying other students, especially Daniel. His disappearance unleashed pure chaos. Theories ran rampant. Some whispered that both boys had run away, while others, with trembling voices, hinted that something much darker had claimed them. The police expanded their search efforts, scouring every inch of Cedar Creek. Volunteers and townsfolk combed the fields, forests, and riverbanks, but no trail ever led beyond the ruins of the abandoned school. No matter how hard they tried, they always ended up standing before the yawning doorway of St. Matthew's basement, which seemed to patiently await its next visitor. Every time I passed by the place, my heart pounded violently in my chest. A voice inside me screamed to stay away, but something stronger, a pull I couldn't resist, kept drawing me nearer. What dark force had Daniel awoken in that place? One evening, just as twilight fell, I heard muffled sobs drifting from inside the old building. I froze, straining to catch the direction of the heart-wrenching, childlike cries that chilled my blood. My legs trembled as I inched toward the rusted door, hanging open like a mouth ready to swallow me whole. As I approached, I saw muddy footprints leading straight into the basement. Fresh ones. Someone had entered recently. Was it Liam or Tyler trying to escape? Before I could take another step, a firm hand gripped my shoulder. I turned around in terror to find my grandfather, Mr. Henry, his face stern. "Never come back here," he whispered shakily, pulling me away from that cursed place that already hungered for more souls. That very night, a furious storm broke over Cedar Creek, as if nature itself was trying to cleanse the evil from our town. The thunder boomed like cannon fire, but amid the chaos, I swear I heard Daniel's voice, faint and sorrowful, whisper from the darkness, "Don't forget me." That chilling moment confirmed what I had feared all along. The disappearances were no accident. They were only the beginning of something much, much worse, and the most terrifying part had yet to be revealed. The storm that ravaged Cedar Creek may have washed the streets clean, but it left the air heavier than ever. In the days that followed, fear wrapped around the town like a suffocating blanket. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, sharing wild theories, but none of it prepared us for what came next. One morning, entering the classroom, I found my classmates huddled around something on the teacher's desk. Miss Allison, our instructor, looked pale and shaken. Lying there was an ancient yellowed letter, so old it seemed ready to crumble. The writing was shaky, frail, as though penned by someone in unimaginable anguish. With a trembling voice, Miss Allison began to read. "I can't endure this anymore. He's waiting for me in St. Matthew's basement. He promised to protect me from all of you. But don't think you're safe. What you did has a price. He'll come for each of you one by one until you understand my pain." The words hung in the air, dripping with menace. We all knew immediately who had written it. Daniel. But how? He had vanished weeks ago. Some classmates broke down in tears, whether from fear or guilt, finally grasping the full weight of the cruelty they had inflicted. Miss Allison tried to assure us that it was just a cruel prank. But deep inside, we all knew better. This was Daniel's voice, reaching out from the darkness, demanding justice. From that day forward, Cedar Creek changed forever. Nighttime vanished from our lives. No one dared step outside after dark. The once lively streets turned ghostly and silent. Even the police, unable to explain the horrors unfolding, seemed paralyzed by fear. Children whispered about seeing shadowy figures darting through the school corridors, small, fleeting shapes that always seemed to flee toward the abandoned building. Others claimed to hear giggling in their dreams, laughter that curdled into agonized cries by morning. As for me, nightmares began to haunt my nights. Dreams where Daniel's ghostly face appeared at the basement entrance, softly calling my name, beckoning me to join him. I'd wake up feeling the phantom touch of his cold fingers brushing my skin. It became crystal clear. Daniel's pain, ignored and mocked for so long, had taken on a terrible living form. It was now hunting us, and we were powerless to escape it. But the worst was still to come. Because soon after, we uncovered something so horrifying that even now I struggle to speak of it. Only days after that chilling warning, the suffocating dread around our school reached unbearable levels. Every hallway, every classroom seemed saturated with silent terror. We all wondered in our hearts, who would be next? There was no doubt anymore. Something unseen was watching us. Then it happened. One morning, a sickening stench began to seep through the school corridors. It was a nauseating blend of damp rot and something far worse, something utterly inhuman. Led by the smell, the teachers, including Principal Johnson, followed it through the school, drawing closer and closer to its source. My classmates and I, too terrified to stay behind, trailed them from a distance. The basement door at St. Matthew's stood ajar, as if breathing out waves of putrid air. As the teachers descended into the dark, their flashlights flickered across the floor, and their horrified screams shattered the silence. There, lying on the damp, filthy ground among dusty debris and thick cobwebs, were the lifeless bodies of Tyler and Liam. The sight was worse than any nightmare. Tyler's skin had turned a ghastly gray, drained of all life. Liam's frozen eyes stared in eternal terror, his body twisted in a grotesque contortion as though he had died desperately trying to escape something unseen. But the most chilling detail of all was scrawled on the walls in what looked like dirt, or something far more sinister. "Now you know my pain." Panic exploded instantly. Teachers fled the basement in utter terror. We children screamed and cried, unable to process the horror we had witnessed. The school was evacuated, and the police cordoned off the entire site. Word of the gruesome discovery spread like wildfire. Fear clutched every home. Families locked their doors, clinging to their children as if trying to shield them from the inevitable. Meanwhile, I carried a crushing guilt deep inside me, knowing that we had all failed Daniel, and now we were paying a terrible price. That night, as I lay in bed, unable to sleep, a new terror gnawed at my soul. Was Daniel truly acting alone? Or was something even darker and more powerful guiding his spirit from the shadows? What I uncovered next would prove that our worst nightmares were far from over. After the gruesome discovery inside St. Matthew's basement, Cedar Creek was never the same. It felt as though an invisible fracture had torn open between our world and something far darker, something we could neither comprehend nor control. The townsfolk, gripped by fear, began to avoid even glancing toward the old school. Some prayed on their porches, others hung crosses and charms on their doors, desperately hoping to ward off the unknown. But the evil had already been unleashed. Soon, the town buzzed with unsettling rumors. Several neighbors swore they had seen tiny figures darting through the alleys at night, shadows slipping between abandoned houses before vanishing without a trace. Others reported hearing dull thuds, the faint cries of children, and doors creaking open by themselves in the dead of night. On one particularly cold evening, Mrs. Helen, an elderly woman who lived near the school, claimed she had seen a group of barefoot children, their skin smeared with dirt, playing among the ruins. What chilled her to the core was their faces, twisted into expressions of unimaginable sorrow. When she tried to approach, the figures dissolved into mist, leaving behind only the faint echo of laughter that froze her blood. At home, my grandfather, Mr. Henry, warned us sternly never to venture out alone, especially after sunset. He spoke of the wandering souls, spirits of those who died, consumed by rage and sorrow, unable to find rest. According to him, St. Matthew's was no longer merely a cursed place. It had become an open portal to things that didn't belong in our world. Meanwhile, my own dreams grew more disturbing. Again and again, I dreamt of Daniel standing at the edge of the basement, his eyes hollow, his mouth curled into a crooked smile. He would stretch out his hand toward me, beckoning me to join him in that endless abyss of pain. The most unsettling part was that every time I woke from those nightmares, I would find muddy footprints at the threshold of my bedroom, as if someone or something had truly been there. The police, powerless against such unknown forces, gradually abandoned their investigation. There was no evidence, no credible witnesses, only fear and whispers that no one dared to voice aloud. The entire town knew we were facing something far beyond reason. That's when people began to say that Daniel was no longer just a tormented soul seeking justice. He had unleashed something older, something ravenous, a force sealed away for generations in the crumbling foundations of the old school. A force that, now freed, would never rest. And the next decision the authorities made would forever seal Cedar Creek's fate. In the face of mounting panic and despair, the local authorities made a drastic move. They decided to permanently seal off the old municipal school and shut down access to St. Matthew's basement. They carried out the operation under the cover of darkness, as if terrified of disturbing whatever hid within those walls. Large wooden planks were nailed hastily across doors and windows. Heavy chains and brand new locks secured every entrance. They even summoned local priests to bless the site, sprinkling holy water and whispering hurried prayers, knowing full well that such measures were a feeble defense against the darkness inside. But it was too late. Despite their efforts, the strange phenomena didn't cease. They worsened. The nights in Cedar Creek grew even more suffocating. Neighbors spoke of flickering lights inside the boarded-up building, as if someone, or something, was wandering the dusty halls with a flashlight. Even more chilling, some children swore they heard rhythmic knocking from behind the barricades, scraping sounds as though tiny hands were clawing desperately at the wood, trying to escape. Mrs. Margaret, a neighbor, claimed she saw a small handprint smudge appear on the dust-caked glass of a forgotten window. Fear gripped the town so fiercely that families began to leave Cedar Creek in droves. Many packed whatever they could and fled to towns like Springfield or Brookfield, abandoning years of memories in favor of safety. My own parents argued constantly about moving away, but like many others, financial struggles kept us tethered to that cursed place. A new school had been thrown together hurriedly on the outskirts, but the bright walls and polished desks couldn't erase the weight of terror lodged deep inside us. We were children who had seen too much, and some things simply can't be forgotten. Every time we passed near the ruins of the old school, we instinctively averted our eyes. But even without looking, we could feel it. the heavy, patient presence seeping from the shattered walls, whispering that our escape was only an illusion. More than once, I dreamed of walking toward the sealed school, of a cold, gnarled hand reaching out through the rotting planks to drag me back inside, while Daniels, or whatever remained of him, laughed somewhere unseen. As the years wore on, nature began to reclaim the old school. Heavy rains collapsed parts of the walls, but the basement, the heart of it all, remained untouched, like a dark heart still beating beneath the earth, waiting. And it was only years later, far from Cedar Creek, that I realized neither distance nor time could ever erase the scars of what we had awakened. We eventually moved to Houston, not long after the school was sealed. My parents, desperate for a new beginning, believed that putting miles between us and Cedar Creek would free us from that nightmare. And at first, life did feel lighter, but deep inside, I knew better. The echo of what we'd lived through was woven into me forever. Sometimes, walking through the gleaming hallways of my new school, I felt eyes watching me from shadowed corners. I would hear faint footsteps behind me, soft murmurs that vanished the moment I turned around. My parents chalked it up to lingering trauma, a child's wild imagination, but I knew it was more than that. It was something real, something that had followed me out of that cursed town. At night, the nightmares returned. I dreamt of St. Matthew's, now overgrown with twisted roots and damp earth, its basement door forever yawning open. In every dream, I was drawn toward that darkness, unable to stop myself. And just as I crossed the threshold, a frozen hand would clutch my wrist, yanking me down as children's laughter and wailing merged into a horrifying chorus. As I grew older, I tried to rationalize it all. I told myself it was just trauma, just memories twisting into nightmares. I buried it, the same way Cedar Creek tried to bury its own sins, under rubble and silence. But over the years, strange things kept surfacing. Now and then, I'd read short, easily overlooked reports in the news, stories about strange disappearances in small towns near Houston. Always children or teenagers, always near abandoned buildings, always under circumstances no one could quite explain. It was as if the darkness hadn't been left behind in Cedar Creek. It had spread, quietly, insidiously, following those who had awakened it, or perhaps those who simply knew too much. Now, as an old man, I sometimes still feel it, a shiver at the back of my neck, a whisper just beyond the edge of hearing when everything else is silent. And I wonder, with a terror I have never been able to shake, did we ever really escape what we woke up in that forgotten basement, or did we simply give it permission to find us? Wherever we might try to hide, maybe even now as you listen to this story, something is already watching you from the dark corners of your room, waiting for the moment you turn off the light to remind you. Some shadows never die.